Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I am Taylor Trask.
And I'm Todd A.
And Todd, it is episode 97. And I say that with authority because we're cheating a little bit, first of all, right? We are, this show started as the Todd and Taylor show where, strangely enough, we did talk about comics on the very first episode we ever touched.
On many of them. Yes.
Yeah, and on many of them too. And then, it became Coffee and Comics. Somewhere along the way, we spun off our Game of Thrones discussions into its own show called Wednesday in Westeros. And then Coffee and Comics became Panelism. And so we've been doing this for quite a while. But as we you mentioned it after we finished recording last time that, hey, we're getting close to 100. And then as I was putting the show notes together, I was like, oh my God, this is episode 97. Yeah. We're almost there. Holy crap.
Yeah.
So does that excite you, terrify you? What are your thoughts on that?
It's, I don't know. It doesn't really terrify me. It's kind of cool to look back at that and go, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of me talking about things.
A lot of time. But at the same time, what's kind of cool too is that it feels like we're finally getting our shit together a little bit. Like we've got this new brand. We're really, kicking up our Instagram presence. If you're not following us on Instagram, go search for panelism.inc. We have been putting up a lot of cool stuff there. So it's like, it's kind of like we're at high school graduation time, like the days of sort of, what are we going to be when we grow up? That's all done. Like we're there. We're embarking on a whole new adventure.
Just hearing you talk about it excites me. I do feel like it's funny. Like, on one hand, it's like, oh man, 3.5 years of this or more. And, approaching 100 episodes of this and I don't know, 20 something of Wednesday in Westeros. Plus we did a couple of, we tried sort of spinning out different topics at times, American Gods and missing the 80s.
Let's never talk about that American Gods.
We're rolling those episodes back into this, I think. So if you go through the archives, they're there. But I guess what's funny to me is that we basically started out as the Todd and Taylor show with this ongoing joke of like, is this the best name for us? Does this really sum up what we are? And yeah, I feel like we finally got there, but we definitely didn't have all our ducks in a row before we launched, which is, I don't know. I like that approach.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like
we waited to have this name, we wouldn't have made 100 episodes.
Oh God, no. And it's kind of like, a lot of people who do podcasting will admit it is sort of a, searching through the dark to find some, you're sort of feeling around, trying to figure out what works. There's a lot of elements, you have to get along with your co-host. So, good for us there. We don't hate each other yet, which is kind of fascinating. But then it's like, what's the brand? What's the topic? Discuss. We kind of banged around for a while, and we keep coming back to comics. Like that seems to be the thing that we're always the most interested in talking about. We have no shortage of books to talk about or things in comics to talk about. So it's kind of cool. We're gonna have to talk separately about what the hell our 100th episode is going to be. It should probably be something exciting, I would think.
100 comic book reviews.
That's right. A marathon. Or we could go
100-hour podcast.
Or we could just do a review a minute for 100 minutes and just be like, just have a timer. That would be exhausting, both for the listener and for us, I think. At some point, one of us has got to pee, and that's going to be really funny to see.
I would finally get a chance to be like, sucks.
Yeah. Loved it. Great art. Like I feel like at some point during that I'd become really repetitive. Like, oh, great art, great story. What can you say? Next up, oh, great art, just amazing story. One of our best picks. It would just become silly.
Such a dumb segue or sidebar that where someplace I was this weekend. I got prompted by my Android like, you let others know what you think about this coffee shop, and I was like, all right, 5 stars. And I'd finally hit the level where they invited me to become a local guide.
Oh, yay. Congrats. Welcome.
And so then that prompts you to review the last 40 places you've been. And I'm like, 5 stars, loved it. 5 stars, loved it. 5 stars, loved it. 2 stars, hate the vibe. 5 stars, loved it. 5 stars, loved it. So yeah, that's pretty much how I'll approach episode 100.
don't let Google trick you. Like this local guide thing, you feel all special, and then it's like, we're gonna put you to work, and then you just like they're constantly like, hey, there's 5 photos here. Which of these do you like? Do you know if this place has handicap accessible parking? Like, I don't what? And it's like, and it takes things that like you've never reviewed, and it's like, hey, we noticed you drove by this gas station. Do you know? It's like, I don't know. Stop asking me. Like, I'm not.
So you are an insider. You know.
Apparently, it thinks I am. I mean, it's like I'll search for a sushi place. It's like, does a sushi place have great sushi? I was like, I haven't even eaten there yet. I don't know.
You've nailed all the things that happened to me after that. I was like, wait, what are these places? I've never been to these places. Then I realized, like, oh, it's next door to like when I filled my car up with gas. Like, no, what? Oh man, yeah, it's prompting me for all that, you know, all the answers to questions and photos and blah blah blah. Anyway, that's how we're doing episode 100.
All right, fair enough. Well, on episode 79, which is this episode that you're listening to right now.
Oh, that's amazing that you did some research to our own.
Wait, did I say 79? I mean 97. Good Lord.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to reference what was on number 79.
Oh, no. Just this is episode 97, which you're listening to, hopefully still. And we have an episode that we review. This is my book pick on this episode, and I have picked. I'm not even gonna like lead into it. I'm just gonna tell you what it is. Before Watchmen, Ozymandias / Crimson Corsair. Now,
whoa, hold on. What Crimson Corsair is like? Is that a story arc name?
No, so all the Before Watchmen titles are split between basically two trade paperbacks.
Gotcha. Yeah,
one of them is like Minutemen and then Silk Spectre. So they collected single issues, and then they put these hardcover trade paperbacks, but it's like two collected stories in each. Now, this one is a little tricky because the Ozymandias story is most of it. Crimson Corsair was a thing that appeared at the end of each individual issue, and so they collected it all and popped it in here. And there's also the kind of bonus feature of a one-shot around Dollar Bill, which is one of the Minutemen characters. So I'm going to break this down into each of these 3 sections. Ozymandias, written by Len Wein, art by Jae Lee, or Jae Lee. I haven't yet figured out how he pronounces that name.
I believe it's Jay.
Jay, okay. And color by June Chung. We'll get more into that in a second. Curse of the Crimson Corsair, also written by Len Wein and John Higgins, art by John Higgins. And then the Dollar Bill one-shot, written by Len Wein. Again, he's a busy guy. And art by Steve Rude with color by Glenn Whitmore. So I'm going to come back into, I'll kind of break each of these down, focusing mostly on the Ozymandias arc because that's the most interesting. Spoilers, the Crimson Corsair part is not that great, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. But let's kind of pull back for a second. If you don't know, if you're like, Before Watchmen, what is that? About 4 or 5 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, about 5 or 6 years ago. It was about 2012, 2013. DC had this brilliant idea. They're like, hey, people like that Watchmen book. Let's do prequels. And there was a lot of like, oh God, please don't. A lot of people were very nervous about this. Clearly Alan Moore wants nothing to do with this. Alan Moore, the original writer of Watchmen, is notorious for saying, do not take my work and do other things with it. I will decide when the time and place is right. DC said, we don't care. We're going to put this out. They convinced Len Wein to write a bunch of them, kind of spearhead it, and off they went. And they put them all out as single issues. So there's, an arc of issues for the Comedian, an arc of issues for Dr. Manhattan, for Night Owl, for Ozymandias. And there was a bunch of one-shots that they put out amongst those. And then, like I said, at the end of each is a little teaser for this Crimson Corsair thing, which they really tried to make like the new version of Dawn of the Night Treader. I think that's, what's the original? Like Dawn is
wait, are you talking about the pirate thing?
Yeah, in the original Watchmen.
Isn't so like the black
yeah, you're right. I just brain farted that one. We'll come back to that. Look that up while I continue on here.
I'm on it.
I feel like a terrible Watchmen fan. I am a huge Watchmen fan. In fact, if you haven't listened to any of our other episodes, Watchmen was kind of my big gateway drug back into comics in 2011, 2012. That was, I had been into comics a little bit, as a kid, largely through the He-Man toy comics, the little booklets that came out, a few other things here and there, Ninja Turtles now and then. But when the Watchmen movie came out, I was a huge fan of that movie. And a lot of people, will probably scream in the speaker, no, the movie's terrible, but I loved the movie. Interestingly enough, I loved the movie and wanted to know the source material better. And so I grabbed kind of a really nice hardcover version of Watchmen, the book, and just devoured it. Loved everything about it. Loved what it did. Loved how it subverted the grid system. Used it to tell, sort of the thematic story. I loved how Alan Moore put in all sort of the little asides, the newspaper clippings, the interviews, book excerpts from stuff inside the world. I just love Watchmen. I will do an entire Watchmen-centric episode later on in 2019. So we'll be able to dive into, maybe we'll dive more into that then. So having loved everything about Watchmen, I was really in the bag for this Before Watchmen stuff. I was going to give it a taste. And strangely enough, the Ozymandias book I'm holding now actually was the first Before Watchmen thing I consumed. I just bought the trade sight unseen based on the fact that I wanted to know more about Ozymandias, and got really lucky in the fact that it's a really freaking great story.
Whoa. So you didn't buy any of the single issues to kind of test the waters?
No. I'd seen them, but I was like, you know what? And I was still, as I am today, I'll go to the trade paperback or the graphic novel first. Single issues I will definitely do if I'm either impatient or if I feel like the single issue has some really cool collector's value, or there's a cool variant, or I just think it's a better consumed story as single issues. We've talked about that a little bit.
I think this is so interesting because, and we may just want to, maybe I should just tap this and we circle back to it later, but I was picking up single issues of different Before Watchmen titles, and even went to a Before Watchmen panel at Dragon Con, I think in 2013. And that, I think it was the single issues that sort of turned me off of it. Whereas if they had just come out as trades, I probably would have picked up a couple and really enjoyed them. So that's a thing we should talk about later.
I love the trade format. They're hardcover trades, at least the ones that I have. I don't have them all. I actually grabbed one digitally too. I grabbed the Dr. Manhattan Night Owl one digitally. The only one I don't have is the comedian one, just because I heard that story was the weakest of them all. From all the people I've read reviews of, the Ozymandias story is the strongest, and the comedian story is the weakest, and then everything else kind of fits in between. So I kind of got lucky. But I love the physical artifact of having this book is wonderful. Let me just do a quick back of the cover read to get you into it. The prequels to the best-selling graphic novel of all time are finally here. Before Watchmen. To what lengths won't Adrian Veidt go to become the world's smartest man? What sacrifices won't he make? Who won't he push out of his way? Before Watchmen, Ozymandias paints an uncompromising portrait of a man whose altruistic desire to right a corrupt planet might come at the cost of his humanity. And then goes on, collected in its entirety for the first time is The Curse of the Crimson Corsair, a harrowing tale of an accursed pirate with eerie similarities to the darkly memorable Watchmen counterpart, Tales of the Black Freighter. There's the title. Yep. And then finally, Dollar Bill begins as a concept, a film mascot for a popular financial institution. But after a publicity stunt goes further than he can imagine, the actor may be more of a hero than he ever bargained for. Legendary writers Len Wein, Swamp Thing, with celebrated artists Jae Lee, Stephen King's The Dark Tower, John Higgins, Hellblazer, and Steve Rude, Nexus, reveal the never-before-seen histories of the world before Watchmen. Now, I want to focus real quick before we get into the details on just the fact that this is a controversial series. A lot of people said we don't need it, much like we're seeing right now with the HBO Watchmen series that even I'm like, I don't.
Yeah, we don't need that.
You need that? Like, and everything that keeps coming out about that series just makes me go, I'm into the Watchmen universe, but I don't think we need that HBO series. I'll be happily proven wrong if it looks that way, but
I would also say we don't need the Doomsday Clock DC.
Oh God, yeah,
mega event right now.
That was completely pointless. This, however, is not. The Before Watchmen series, and I'll focus. Obviously, this is the Ozymandias book, but the Minutemen book, the storyline, the Silk Spectre one, the Night Owl one, the Dr. Manhattan one, they are really, really good at filling in and contextualizing these characters in a way that really honors the original Watchmen book. They all occur before Watchmen, but a lot of them take you up to the events that literally begin the Watchmen book, and the Ozymandias one is certainly that. It takes you from his birth, essentially, from Adrian Veidt's birth, right up into that moment where he knocks, or doesn't knock, he breaks down the comedian's door to murder him. So you see that context. And they also do this wonderful thing where events in one Before Watchmen series, you'll see them, and then you'll see it reflected in another book. So like there's a couple events in the Ozymandias story that you see then from another point of view in the Minutemen story or the Silk Spectre story. That famous scene where they're all gathered, the modern Watchmen are gathered around, and it's in the movie, it's Adrian Veidt who's got the map, and then the comedian lights the map on fire. In the actual Watchmen book, it's not. It's one of the original Minutemen. That famous scene is reflected in everybody's story. So it really provides context. The comedian one is the only one that I think it's mostly his stint in Vietnam. I'm not sure we need that. And I've flipped through it a couple times trying to convince myself that it's worth it. And it's just, that's the only one that I'm not that thrilled about. But all of these are great. Let's delve into the Ozymandias one. So first and foremost, Jae Lee's illustrations with June Chung's color is a work of art. If you've ever seen Jae Lee's stuff before, he's got a very, very specific way of illustrating. You do not see that style of illustration usually anywhere else. Once you see it and you know it's him, you recognize it everywhere. I was really happy to see, when I was reading Superman American Alien, each issue or each chapter is designed by different artists. You get a different glimpse of Clark Kent's life through a different artist's eyes. As soon as the Jae Lee chapter starts, I'm like, oh my God, it's that guy. And I had to go back and kind of reacquaint myself with his, I'm assuming it's a him. Yes, it is. Okay, great. I'm just making sure I don't go this whole episode with his catalog. And then the difference, though, the June Chung coloring is just exquisite. Like, I don't typically shout out colorists as much as I should on the show, but like this is it is gorgeous color. Especially if you've seen Jae Lee's work in other iterations with somebody else coloring it. This just is outstanding. The shading, the simplicity. A lot of the panels don't have elaborate backgrounds. It's very character centric. So you'll see a gorgeously shadowed and colored character with a just single colored background, contrasting them, in the foreground. So there's very, very character centric. There's also a beautiful subversion of the panel system here. You don't see this in a lot of the other Before Watchmen titles, but they really went out of their way to utilize circles and the shapes of panels to really drive the story. There's a lot of inverted mirroring going on. So it helps to have the actual physical book. So when you open it up, the left side, will have a circle. The right side will have an inverted version of that circle. There's a lot of playing around with that. So that honors, the original format of Watchmen in a really cool way.
Now, is there a specific Ozymandias reason for doing that? Like, is there a specific character reason for the circles, especially, or the symmetry?
It feels like, and maybe I'm just dense and I haven't noticed a more obvious answer to that question, but it feels to me like it is very mathematical, very calculated.
Yeah.
And so as the story goes on, it's all a look into how Adrian Veidt thinks. And so he's very calculated. He's very methodical, and just sort of the tick-tock, just the symmetry of everything, I think mirrors that. I think that it seems like that's sort of what they were going for.
Right.
There's also a very smooth, clean presentation. Reminds me a lot of a Bond movie, just the way characters are posed and positioned. There's a lot of very interesting, elegant kind of staging of characters. Everybody's very sexy, very sophisticated. All the fights, when you see Rorschach and he's kicking somebody, it's very stylized. It looks like it's going to freeze frame and a Bond, music is going to start playing or something behind it. So that's really cool. As far as the story goes, you get the full backstory of Adrian Veidt. But in this case, he's always the protagonist. So, spoilers,
Right.
in Watchmen, he ends up being the bad guy at the end. You come into this book knowing that he's going to do this terrible thing, but the book never paints him, as sort of a villain. He's always the protagonist. He's always sort of moving through the world. So you never think of him in that way. There's actually not a villain.
So is it like you're getting the feeling that he's telling you this story and that's why he's the protagonist?
He's narrating the entire thing.
Gotcha.
It's all almost exclusively, I would say 90% of it is him and his thought speech bubbles.
Oh, right.
There's some dialogue, as he meets different characters and things, but it's a lot of him observing and talking, which is important because you just get a bigger sense of how he thinks. It does, like I said, intersect brilliantly with the events of Watchmen itself and also the other Before Watchmen titles. The one interesting thing about it is he's presented as a totally omniscient character. He knows everything. He knows everything that's happening to him. He knows, he's always 10 steps of everybody else, even you, the reader. So you really are just seeing him lay out in sort of this kind of condensed timeline, his life, what he wants the world to be. It's a lot like, if you've ever read any sort of those DC God characters like the Phantom Stranger, or anything like that. It feels like that. It feels like he's this kind of omniscient, godlike character moving through this world, and you just kind of have to keep up with him. But in that regard, it's a character study of the man Adrian Veidt. You get to see his insecurities. You get to see his failures, as few as they are. You get to see why, things that he intentionally cuts away from his life to make him stronger or smarter. You never really care, or, you never fear for or care about his fate. He's going to live to see the events of Watchmen. So you're never really concerned about his well-being. It's not one of those stories. It is very much a character study. This would be a really good, there's almost like a Shakespearean quality to it in that regard. You get to see this kind of tragic character ultimately, and what forges that, in some ways. And it is, again, it's about learning how his mind works. One of the things that you do learn that I found really interesting is that he struggles with loneliness, and it's kind of a really interesting twist. His parents, kind of his upbringing and his parents' fate is interesting to learn about. He does have this very deep romantic relationship with a woman. Something happens to her, so that drives him further into this sort of lonely position. Real quick on that.
I did not think he was a heterosexual man.
Well, yeah, in Watchmen, Rorschach mentions the fact, I think in the book even too, like he mentions the fact that Adrian Veidt might be, possible homosexual. There's always been this cloud of, is he gay over the Adrian Veidt character? So it's really interesting to see him right out of the gate. They say, oh no, he's going to have sex with a woman, and he's, very much, he's a man of the world. I do think though that the loss and the loneliness he feels pushes him to be completely asexual, which is where Rorschach can't square that in his own mind. So then he thinks he's gay, which is really interesting. That's an interesting contextual layer, even if Alan Moore didn't intend that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they've sort of, they've back padded his character to make him even more complex.
Well, yeah. And I haven't read it, but just hearing you describe that, like the first thing that jumped out in my mind was maybe maybe Rorschach's like meant to show us I don't know, like maybe the relationship with the woman fell apart because he really is gay. And
maybe, well, the woman, something very permanent happens to her. And so he loses her very permanently. And so it
becomes even more isolated and lonely.
Yeah, and he even says that he's like, I'm never going to let this happen to me again. He has a series of of female assistants who are kind of like his number two essentially.
Yeah.
But as that person knows more about his plans, he basically has to knock them off so that no one person knows. So he has these women who are very close to him and know his secrets, and then they eventually have to all die, for one reason or another. So. Ubestis, his genetically engineered, cat creature that he has, kind of becomes his one and only true friend, which is, a little sad at the end of the day. This man who's infinitely intelligent, infinitely skilled, has very effortlessly built up this empire of money and wealth and influence. He just can't relate to people. He could, but he doesn't want to get hurt, and he feels like that just constantly is a weakness in his own mind. So he just, like every sort of tragic male character after Power, they just sort of, the more power they amass, the more isolated they feel, and then sort of put that on themselves.
So you mentioned that when you bring up what happens in Watchmen and what Alan Moore, it gives an interesting twist to what Alan Moore was writing. Do we know anything about, like, was anything in Before Watchmen based on any notes of Moore's or anything like that? Like,
as far as I can tell, no. This is all whole cloth, because Alan Moore there's no way he was ever going to endorse this. So there's no feedback, no input.
That's absolutely the impression I got.
I mean, maybe Dave Gibbons chimed in from time to time. Dave Gibbons, if you don't know, illustrated Watchmen, and that's almost diminishing his role. He and Alan Moore co-created that book. They were in symbiosis. It was Lennon and McCartney making that book. Dave Gibbons has been much, much, much more sort of open to the fandom and other things. Alan Moore sort of looks at it like this
Watchmen panel that I saw at Comic-Con when the movie came out.
Yeah, and he's always the one, when they do reissues of the books, Dave Gibbons is the guy that does like the forwards and like commentary stuff. And I mean, Alan Moore sort of looks at it as Watchmen, especially, and then V for Vendetta too, as sort of like these, finite literary pieces that there should be nothing else. They exist. That's it. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he's a little bit more loose with, I think. But
someday we should talk about how terrible the art in V for Vendetta is.
Oh, don't even start. I'm just going to plant this seed right now. I like the movie way more than I like the book.
I have never even attempted to read the book, because every time I picked it up, I'm like, this is gross.
The art is not good. And we're going to get a lot of flack for that. But like, the movie is almost perfect. The book, it's a struggle. I own it because I'm like, it's one of those important graphic novels that everybody should own. But it is, every year I pop it open thinking, okay, now I'm ready. And every year I'm like, nope, it's just not. It's a tough read. I've gotten through the whole thing, but it is a tough sit. We'll cover that in another episode. But one other thing I want to mention, like Ozymandias as a character, he interacts. You see his first meeting with Rorschach, his first meeting with the comedian. And actually, it's his meetings with the comedian that are really interesting. He runs into the comedian a couple different times, and that actually informs his outlook on the world, both privately, but then also, when he's with other heroes and stuff. The comedian is represented in this book really, really well, which makes, his individual storyline in Before Watchmen all the more frustrating because it's so wonky. This is the comedian that I think everybody wants to see. It is fantastic. One of the things he mentioned, he does interact briefly too with Moloch. So if you know Watchmen as a book, Moloch is sort of this supervillain they're always referring to, and you see him, sort of retired and just sad in the Watchmen universe. In these Before Watchmen books, I think every story arc references Moloch in some way, shape, or form. And in this one, he's really well done. Like you get a sense of how dangerous he might have been. He's kind of like a drug kingpin. He's represented, kind of as this very smooth, leisure sort of gangster character. And so you really get a sense of, Moloch was probably a big deal at one point. That's cool. They don't dwell on it because it's not a Moloch, it's not the Moloch book. There's actually a Moloch one shot in Before Watchmen that is interesting. We'll talk about it another time, but I just want to throw that out there because it's cool to see every slice of Before Watchmen sort of flesh out the universe in their own way. I'm really curious if there was a master outline that they were all working off of or how that worked, but it's because one book or one story arc will reference a series of events in one way, and you'll see that represented very differently through somebody else's eyes or another artist's eyes. So anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on it. It's just a great story. If you like Ozymandias as a character at all, you're going to learn a lot more about him. You'll be almost more jazzed up to just go back and reread Watchmen again after you get through this, because it really does flesh out his character. I think of all the characters in Watchmen, he's the most mysterious on purpose, largely. But this gives you, you're starved to see like Jude Law and like, as Adrian Veidt in some movie or something, after reading this, like some character could really do this well. And again, I can't say enough about the Jae Lee artwork. It's just freaking gorgeous.
Yeah.
Real quick shout out the Crimson Corsair portion of the book. Yeah, I'm not gonna say much about it. It's so bleak and dark. The John Higgins art is good, but it's just he has this color palette that is just it's a tough sit. It's like it is the comic version of Viggo Mortensen in The Road. That Cormac McCarthy book
cheery.
It looks depressing. Everything is just just sad and depressing. I read through it once. And I was like, this is just not, they didn't need to do it. It was clear. They're like, well, we need our version of the Tales of the Black Freighter.
That's a bummer.
It's just not, it doesn't have any sort of commentary. How the beauty of the Tales of the Black Freighter is that it tangentially comments on a chapter in Watchmen in a really sort of specific way. This kind of does, but when you remove it from the context of the individual issues, you totally lose that. And then just as it's on its own, it's just not a strong or interesting story at all. So you can skip it. Dollar Bill, on the other hand, is a really cool little one-shot. I actually, strangely enough, I bought the Dollar Bill one-shot before I bought this book.
Okay.
I'm sort of contradicting what I mentioned in the beginning. I did, because the Dollar Bill one-shot cover was really cool. And I'm like, well, that's kind of neat. They're doing a comic about Dollar Bill as a character. How weird. I grabbed it. So then when I found it, when I knew it was part of this, this trade, I was even more excited because I'm like, oh, here it is again. It's really freaking cool. It's a great introduction to the Before Watchmen Minutemen character arc. There's an entire series of Before Watchmen, the Minutemen, and so you get like their backstory, which is probably my second favorite thing after the Ozymandias storyline. They really delve into the history of the Minutemen, and I love it. So if you want a taste of that, this Dollar Bill one shot is really cool. It's just bright, colorful, beautiful art, very reminiscent of the Golden Age comics, which is appropriate because the Minutemen took place in the 30s and 40s. So this is kind of an homage to that. It is a heartbreaking little story, though. It really emphasizes the idea that there are these regular people with no superpowers at all, no money. They're just regular dudes and girl and ladies engaging in this insane act of dressing up and fighting armed criminals. So you have this guy, this actor who just sort of stumbles into this audition. This bank makes him Dollar Bill. And so he's kind of like Captain America, the First Avenger, that movie where Steve Rogers is just going on stage doing these PR tours, essentially. Kind of like that, very reminiscent of that. And then he gets brought into the Minutemen, which is supposed to just kind of be a publicity thing too. But then they actually start, solving crimes and stuff. And then he just,
just like the real Minutemen on the border, right?
Something like that.
Solving crimes, wearing costumes.
But then he, it's you see a glimpse of it in the very beginning of the Watchmen movie where you see Dollar Bill, his cape got caught in the turnstile door and he's been shot to death.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's in the movie. That's in the very beginning of the movie where you hear like the times they are a change and the Bob Dylan song's playing and you see all these beautiful little vignettes at the beginning of the movie. Well, that Dollar Bill in the doorway thing, it's you get to find out how that happened in this little one shot. So it's a lovely little thing. And then of course at the end of the whole graphic novel, there's a bunch of DVD extras, all the variant covers for the Adrian Veidt stuff, which are really interesting and cool. You get a couple variant covers for Dollar Bill. Is there a variant for no, there is no variant for the Crimson Corsair because of course not. And you get a couple other, little sketches and concept drawings and stuff too. So all in all, just a really cool. If you're into Watchmen at all, if you're into really good DC storytelling, highly recommend this. I have it in physical hardcover, which I think is the best format for it. But I would imagine that this artwork is going to look gorgeous on digital too. So if you want to take a stab at it, maybe grab a digital single issue and then decide from there. If you're a fan of Watchmen, if you're also a fan of stories like Batman Year One. I would recommend this. That you get to see once Adrian Veidt takes on the Ozymandias personality. How you even get to see how he chose the costume and all that stuff. There's the scene of him going out on his first night and sort of figuring out how to fight crime for the first time. So there's that whole year one kind of motif, and you get to feel about get a sense of that. But if you also like The Dark Knight Returns and all of Batman's internal monologues, you'll love this too, because it's Adrian Veidt just talking about what he thinks and what he sees and how he's deducing things the whole time.
I love the idea of thinking of every heroic Batman story now as just being told from Batman's point of view. And if you told it from the bystanders, they're like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a psychopath.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting thread because, Adrian Veidt, he's a self-made billionaire, but he's still has infinite resources.
Yeah.
A thriving corporate empire that he can use to, supplement his crime fighting, or eventually his plan to sort of shock the world into peace. So there is a pretty big Batman thread here. It's almost like it is kind of fun to read this as though what if this was Bruce Wayne's real story?
Yeah.
How would he think about other heroes? What would he think? It would be really interesting to see a Bruce Wayne story told from this point of view, where, there's a meeting with the Justice League and it's he's just sitting there ragging on everybody in his own mind while he's sitting there sort of participating. Oh, this is going to go well. I would love to see maybe that exists.
It may scratch your itch to read All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. When he totally destroys the Green Lantern by bringing him into a room that he's painted yellow.
Oh, geez.
He's like, what kind of idiot's super weakness is a color?
I love that. That might be really
Robin
good.
almost kills him.
Robin almost kills Green Lantern or Batman.
Yeah, because they bring him into a yellow room and his power doesn't work on the color yellow, so he can't fight either of these guys. And Robin totally miscalculates and.
Wait. So what was the setup to that? Were they just hey Hal, come here real quick? And they're just come in here.
I can't remember why they're trying to take him down.
What do you need, guys? No, just come in here. Just come in. We got to show you this in here.
It's I think the lights are out and he flies through the window or something, and they flip the lights on and it's yellow.
Oh God.
I just remember. Really I'm pretty sure Batman has to perform an emergency tracheotomy on Hal Jordan.
Oh God.
It's pretty epic. Anyway, sorry to go off the track.
Jesus, Robin, no! Dick, no! You killed him!
That is literally what happens.
Oh shit, this has gone too far. That would be amazing. Okay, I'm gonna add that to my police.
All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank
Excellent.
Miller.
Well, that's my pick for this week. Any other questions?
That's awesome. No, I'm glad to hear that because as I looked up a couple of when I was looking at Jae Lee's art, recognized that I had picked up at least a couple of issues of this one and it just never stuck. So I think that idea of me seeing the single issues, it was harder to see where this was going to go, Yeah. And especially knowing I think we knew at the time.
It would feel so disjointed. It is a graphic novel. The single issues are merely chapters of a full story.
And I want to give Silk Spectre another shake because that was another one where I really liked the creative team, which was Darwin Cook and Amanda Connor, and just kind of gave up on it because I was like, where are we going? I don't need to see her childhood, Yeah.
There's these. I'll say this: the Silk Spectre storyline. It's drawn very differently. It's much more sort of 60s psychedelic teenager, But there's some really cool story notes in there, especially if you're familiar with who her real father is. There's a really cool scene or two in there, and it's a very small story. She's kind of like West Coast Avengers. It's her in Los Angeles or San Francisco or whatever, somewhere on the West Coast before she even meets up with the rest of the Watchmen. So it's kind of cool.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. Well, anyway. Until our next episode, you can find us online at panelism.inc. That's INK. We are also panelism.inc on, what's that thing's Instagram? Yeah.
Instagram.
You should definitely check that out. We're just posting a bunch of our favorite comic art and talking about a lot of the books that we have talked about on this podcast previously, which dig into our archives, and we are on Stitcher and Google Play and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Podbean. And I don't know why I always mention Podbean. I just think it's the funniest one.
Podbean is the Alta Vista of the podcast environment in 2020.
Is it?
It is the lycos.com of podcast aggregators.
Yeah. It definitely fit. Podbean is like when your friend just gives you a CDR of like a new album.
Yeah.
But yeah, use them if that, if that's what you're into. Anyway, subscribe, share with your friends. We will be back on New Comic Book Day next week with a new episode.